He'd been saving up since he heard. At first, he couldn't do anything. Just lay curled under his duvet or on his sofa, staring at things. The wall, the blank TV, the congealing washing up in the sink. But then he thought, fuck it. It's a long weekend. Only one way to make it shorter. No flag waving with the family. Not even an away-from-it-all coupley city break for him. He wanted the narrow, strip-lit horseshoe of Evan's crammed shop, planning his strategy. A case of Rolling Rock to start with. Main course, 2 bottles of Bulgarian wine, both colours, for a £5. And pills for dessert. There was even half a bottle of Gordon's and some Tia Maria for coffee and liqueurs. Sorted. Having a party, eh? Evan winked at him. What must he think? As if Brian would serve that silly rubbish to guests. Sort of, yeah. Brian paid up, took his change. Evan's eyes snapped back to the TV, some Welsh soap. God knows how he got S4C in Brixton. But Evans was the only offie within a mile not tarty with Bunting, and Brian liked that. You watch yourself out there tonight, boyo, said Evan seriously. All this celebration can get violent. Got to stay on your toes. Brian thought about the kids always circling on bikes, on skateboards, on foot in the bare precinct outside, and he shuddered. They never stopped moving, like sharks. He didn't want to be afraid of them, and he wasn't, physically. After all, he had nothing left worth nicking. But they were so strange to him. He'd never really understood kids. Just having been one once wasn't enough by a long shot. But kids had never understood him either, so he reckoned they were even. Inside the flat, Brian kicked aside the red bordered envelopes slithering over the mat like silverfish. He'd left them for whoever came after. They weren't his problem anymore. He pondered leaving the door on the latch for ease of access, but he was still scared of someone, some kid, finding it open while he was still there and coming in. Stupid, really, but this was his home, his fortress. Shut the door. He tossed his keys on the battered coffee table. He wouldn't need them again. Might as well leave them in plain sight. They'd cut off the electricity last week, so he couldn't watch telly. But it was all rubbish anyway. Brian reasoned. Instead, he dug out his only remaining source of entertainment. A pink portable radio someone had thrown out. Some kid, some little girl who'd got an iPod or a stereo instead. Its Hello Kitty logo was almost scratched away, but it worked. He remembered finding it. It seemed significant at the time. His last girlfriend's name had been Kitty. The radio had lasted longer than the relationship. And now he'd been alone longer than he'd been with her, but that didn't make it much better. The batteries should last him as long as he needed. Though he'd have to keep it down, and that bloody woman next door would start banging on the walls again. He pulled his tobacco pouch and papers from under the sofa, cracked open a beer, and tuned Kitty to Magic FM as the stars crept warily out over Brixton. An hour later, Brian was well on his way. 4 green bottles stood on the table, in amongst shreds of tobacco and microscopic crumbs of hash. He'd have to be a bit more frugal, he thought. Pace himself. Take it easy, baby. Make it last. Make it last all night, advised Tom Petty from Kitty's cracked pink speakers. Brian turned it up and then down again quickly as he remembered the woman next door. She was an American girl, he mumbled, fumbling in the kitchen drawer for a corkscrew. He got it through the neck of the first bottle of red before he realised it was a screw top. Bollocks, he said. He tried to unscrew the cap and the corkscrew at the same time. He should have guessed. Everything's easier nowadays. No ceremony anymore. No ring pulls you can rip off. No corks you can plug back into the bottle with a message and throw it into the canal. Just uncap and drink till it's all gone. He was feeling mellower now, like things weren't so bad. He hoped it'd last. In the flat opposite, blue ghosts of telly flickered against the net curtains. From the strobing, a thriller, he reckoned. Explosions, gunshots. More excitement in 90 minutes than most people had seen in their whole lives. He got the bottle open, necked a mouthful. Despite his beer-numbed taste buds, it really was disgusting. He almost gagged, swollen with a mint. Oh, Jesus, Evan, are you trying to kill me? Maybe the white was better. He wrenched off the cap and glugged some into a mug. It smelled like cat pee. Though a bloke in a pub once told him that was a sign of a good Sauvignon Blanc. He sipped it. Whatever this was, it wasn't good, so... Another joint would make it taste better, make everything taste better for a bit. Brian counted 6 green bottles as he lurched to the toilet for a piss. He wasn't sure how much of the wine he'd drunk. There might be another one rolling around under the sofa somewhere. Still, not bad. And he was still standing. A guy. An urban hero. A champion of alcoholic endurance. A marathon run. 6 green bottles hanging on the wall, he sang, dribbling into the bowl. The seat was broken, but he got used to that. It suited him to live in squalor, now that he was no longer economically active. What was the point of bothering, with no job to go to? He had his freedom. Freedom to do nothing, with nobody. So that's what he was doing. Nobody was going to see the flat again, at least until he was gone. So why tidy? Why bloody clean, he asked himself, wiping his hands on his jeans. Well, he's only going to get dirty again. He was surprised the council hadn't evicted him already. Busy with other things, probably. Jubilee brunches, keeping youths off the street, housing the homeless. He liked the idea of a homeless person inheriting his flat. They'd probably look after him, do it up a bit. He toyed with the idea of leaving the last bottle of wine for the new tenant, just sort of welcome. And then he remembered how horrible it was. He shivered and cuddled himself. Time to move on to the gin, he said. At least that's meant to taste horrible. Back in the living room, the radio was playing Snow Patrol. Chasing Cars, smiled the DJ, been voted the anthem of the noughties. Which one was that? Brian leaned over to hear it. If I lay here, if I just lay here. Tears scorched Brian's eyes. The sentimental stage at last. Their song, this night of all bloody nights. Turn it up, he said. Wobbly fingers scrabbled at the dial. Fuck it, turn it up! Snow Patrol's anguish lacerated the speakers. Would you lie with me and just forget the world? Brian fell back into the sofa, more by luck than judgment. Spread his arms wide to embrace the ceiling. Let's waste time, he bawled. Tears trickled warm into the cups of his ears. Chasing cars around our heads. There was a loud, irritated banging on the wall. Piss off, said Brian. Don't you have a soul? There was a pause, and then another series of heavy bangs. What are you doing in anyway? Brian slared. Should be a party. No work tomorrow. He giggled. He rolled off the sofa and went to look for the gin under the sink, leaving the radio blasting, punctuated by hard thuds. But when he got back to the kitchen, the thumping had stopped. And the radio was slurring too, faint, sleazy, static whispering from Kitty's grill. He cradled her next to his ear. What's wrong, baby? He shook her and listened again. Dying away now, the chorus was barely audible in the lecculess dark. The batteries. Fuck, he should have bought spares. He should have expected it to last all night. He glanced at his watch. 1:30 AM. Everyone would still be open. And he had a fiver left. Enough for music as long as he needed it. He needed Kitty on beside him. He couldn't do this alone. He shrugged on his jacket and he crashed out of the flat, slamming the door behind him with an apocalyptic bang. That'd show her next door. Serve her right for not liking Snow Patrol. It was at this point Brian realised, with an awful feeling of inevitability, that he'd left his keys on the table. He swayed for a moment and sank to his knees on the welcome mat, pushing his face into his hands. The keys were inside. He was outside. There was a spare set. The spare set was next door. His previous next door neighbour, nice old Mr. Eustace, who'd gone to hospital one day and never come back, had kept the spare keys for Brian and let him in a few times when Brian had forgotten his. Brian knew where they were. He could visualise them, hanging on the corner just by the gas cupboard. They were almost reachable if you put your hand through the letterbox. No. That was the fast route to a handful of broken fingers. The woman next door probably kept a cricket bat in the umbrella stand to fend off rapists. She had that look, uptight, defensive, hard. He'd have to talk to her. He ran a dry tongue round his lips. Could he talk to her? He said slowly. I'm very sorry about the disturbance. Not exactly Stephen Fry, but he'd have to do. He stood up, brushed off his jeans, knocked firmly on a door. May I have spare keys? He tried, as I waited for an answer. Thank you very much, I'm so sorry. The door opened a crack, jerked to a stop by a chain. A blue eye and a pale face stared at him. I've got a cricket bat, she said. I'm very sorry about disturbance, said Brian. Can I come in? No, said the half a face. Brian hadn't anticipated this. Why not? You're drunk. It's Jubilee weekend. And you've been getting drunk all night listening to magic. I could hear you. Do you know what time it is? Do you? Blue eye rolled. Go away! I've locked myself out. And? You've got my keys. What are you talking about? My spare keys. Mr. Eustace kept them for me. Oh no, hook in the cupboard. The eye stared at him, clearly assessing the chances of him being a rapist. I've got money. Here, I'll give you 5 for the keys. He dug in his pocket and pushed his fist towards the door. The blue eye widened, then narrowed, and for the first time looked up into his. He glanced down. Wrong pocket. In his numb hand was the 10th green bottle. 30 dodgy Valium he'd been saving for the last hurrah, to help the gin go down smoothly on a cloud of sleep. He imagined her closing the door, reaching backwards for the phone to report another drunken junkie, a potential rapist on the loose, and he wanted to cry maybe, but he couldn't remember how to care. She looked back into the house, where beyond his sightline, a mess of pills called from 6 different chemists rattled in a soup bowl, next to a full, untouched mug of Bailey's. Let me just tidy up a bit, she said. One of those nights, eh?